How my dog saved my life. I've always thought dogs have an uncanny way of knowing things we can't comprehend. Things about ourselves, about the world, about moments hanging just over the edge of our understanding. But I didn't truly understand that until one summer evening when my dog, Buck, pulled me from a path I was too stubborn to leave. At the time, I was living in a tiny town called Maple Creek. It wasn't a place marked on any tourist map. Its biggest claim to fame was its long-abandoned railway bridge, which straddled the misty river like a relic from another era. I had come there after a bad breakup and an equally bad job loss, hoping that a quiet spot would give me space to put myself back together. Buck was a rescue, a mix of German Shepherd and something smaller and scruffier. He came into my life on a rainy April morning when I stopped by the animal shelter out of sheer loneliness. The moment I met him, I felt an odd warmth in my chest. He looked at me like he already knew where I was headed and that he was going to walk every step with me. So I brought him home. In the first few weeks, Buck and I fell into a routine. I would write at the small desk in my rented room, trying to piece together a novel I felt no longer had a voice, while Buck dozed at my feet. In the afternoons, we'd walk down the long trail by the river. It was an old path, lined with tall pines and thick underbrush. Sometimes when the mist rose and the sun sank low, it felt like we were the only two creatures left in the world. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was early June. The air was warm but crisp, the sort that announced summer in soft whispers. Buck and I had gone for a longer walk than usual. The trail was deserted. The sun sank toward the horizon, brushing the tops of the pines with a molten glow. As we rounded a bend, Buck suddenly stopped, ears pricked, nose in the air. He gave a low growl. "Easy, boy," I said, brushing my hand down his flank. But he refused to move. He stood planted like a statue, staring down the path. At first, I thought it was a fox or a raccoon. But then I felt it too. A strange shift in the air. Not a sound, but a sense of being watched. My hand tightened around Buck's leash. "Let's go, Buck," I said quietly. He didn't move. Then came the sound. Faint at first. The crack of a branch snapping deep in the woods, followed by the sound of something, or someone, moving closer. The trail was lined with dense trees and undergrowth. Whatever it was remained hidden, but I felt the weight of its presence. "Buck," I said sharply, tugging the leash. He glanced at me, then growled low, deep in his chest. Suddenly he surged forward, pulling me off the trail and down a slope, barking wildly. I stumbled, falling to my knees, scraping my hands. In that moment, a sound ripped the silence apart. A sharp crack, the sound of a rifle. The bullet slammed into the tree where I had been standing moments ago, splintering bark and sending wood chips spraying into the air. For a second, the world stopped. My heart slammed wildly in my chest. Buck was barking furiously, hauling me down the slope until we crashed into a shallow ravine. The sound of snapping branches and the unmistakable voice of a man cursing came from above. Someone was there, someone with a rifle. I pressed myself into the dirt, Buck wedged protectively across my legs. My fingers sank into his thick fur as I tried to slow my breathing. The voice called out, deep and harsh, though I couldn't make out the words. Then came another sound, another shot. This one hit closer, splashing into the earth a few feet away. My hands shook as I pulled Buck closer. He refused to run, refused to leave me. Instead, he pressed himself harder into my side, a low growl rising from his throat. The sound of the man's voice drew nearer. He was coming down the slope. I had no weapon, no phone, no way to defend myself. All I had was Buck. Somehow, that felt like enough. With a deep breath, I pressed my hand to Buck's chest and felt the strong beat of his heart. Then I tapped him twice, the signal I used when I wanted him to stay put, and pulled myself slowly to a crouch. My legs shook as I pulled a sharp rock from the earth and gripped it tight. Through the trees, I spotted a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, rifle resting loosely across one arm. He was looking down the slopes, scanning the ravine. Buck growled softly, ears flattening. I don't know where I found the strength. Maybe it came from sheer terror, or maybe it came from knowing Buck would do anything for me. But I yelled, a raw, defiant sound, and hurled the rock as hard as I could. It clipped a low branch and crashed down near the man's feet. He spun, aiming wildly, and Buck surged forward with a snarl. The man yelled and fired, the sound deafening in the narrow ravine. Buck was a blur of fur and muscle, slamming into the man's legs and knocking him backward. The rifle went flying. I clawed my way up the slope and grabbed the weapon before he could recover. "Stay down!" I yelled, voice shaking. The man was dazed, one hand pressed to a gash Buck had torn across his thigh. He cursed, glaring up at me, but I kept the rifle aimed, my heart beating like a drum. "Why?" I demanded, voice breaking. He didn't answer. Not then. Not ever. Because I never saw him again. I called the police from a nearby farmhouse later that night. They came and combed the woods for hours, but the man was gone, vanished like mist. They said I was lucky to be alive. They said Buck had saved me. They weren't wrong. That night, when Buck and I returned to the little room I called home, I sank down on the floor and pulled him into my arms. He laid his massive head across my lap, sighed, and fell deeply asleep. That was the night I came to understand what loyalty truly means, what belonging truly feels like. Buck didn't just save my life that evening, he gave it back to me. In the weeks that followed, I began to write again. Not the old novel that felt too far gone, but a new one, a better one about belonging and trust, about moments when the world turns dark and an unexpected light shines through. All because of a dog named Buck, and the night he refused to leave my side. The days that followed felt unreal, like waking from a long, dark dream. The sheriff came by with questions, a notebook, and a tired expression. The man Buck had chased off was nowhere to be found. No footprints, no rifle, no evidence except a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. They promised to investigate, but I could tell from the sheriff's voice that this was Maple Creek, and things like this tended to sink quietly into the mist. I should have been afraid, and in many ways I was. But more than that, I felt grateful. Grateful for Buck, grateful to still be here. The quiet moments became sacred. The morning routine of making coffee while Buck watched from his bed felt like a gift. The sound of him snoring at my feet as I worked became a comfort I hadn't known I needed. With each passing day, I noticed the changes in myself. The night of the attack stripped away the leftover threads of despair and self-doubt I had been carrying for too long. Somehow, when you've come close to death, you realize just how much you still want to live. Not the surface version of life you put on for others, but the deeper, harder-to-reach part. The one that hums quietly when you walk a forest trail, or when a warm nose rests on your hand. I started waking earlier. Buck and I would walk the mist-drenched riverbanks every morning, breathing in the moss-scented air. I stopped looking down at my shoes and started looking forward, looking out. The trees became friends, the sound of the river became a language, the quiet became holy. Then came the letter. I found it one morning wedged under the door of my tiny room. No stamp, no return address, just a plain envelope with my name scrawled across it. Buck sniffed it and gave a low whine. I stood there for a moment, uncertain, before tearing it open. I didn't mean for it to end that way. Sometimes we can't stop ourselves from doing the things we fear. I'm sorry. Stay safe. That was all. No signature. No hint of who had tried to kill me or why. The paper shook in my hands, and Buck pressed closer to my leg, as if to tell me I wasn't alone. The sheriff came by when I showed him the note. He shrugged, a mix of resignation and skepticism. Probably someone trying to mess with you. Might be real, might be guilt, might be nothing. He sighed, brushing a hand across the brim of his hat. If you want, I can have one of my deputies stick around for a few nights. Might give you peace of mind. I smiled and shook my head. I've got Buck. That's enough for now. And it was. Somehow, in ways I can't fully explain, Buck became the center of my world. Not as a pet, not as a protector, as a witness. A witness to every moment when the fear bubbled up and needed to be quieted. A witness when I stood at the edge of the ravine where the man had tried to end it all, and felt nothing but the wind brushing my skin. A witness when I finally felt the words from my new book rising in the morning mist. That book became a beacon for me. Not because I thought it would be a bestseller, or that it would make sense to the world, but because it made sense to me, because it spoke a truth I had buried for too long. The truth that life is fragile, unpredictable, and often unfair. But it can also be beautiful. The quiet moments matter. The connections matter. The moments when another being chooses to stand beside you matter. Each night, after a long day of writing or exploring, I would sit with Buck on the creaky porch of that little room. He would rest his head on my lap and I would stroke his fur. And for a few moments, the world felt right. Then came the second letter. It was late summer. The days had grown longer, and Buck and I had fallen into a routine that felt timeless. We were returning from a walk when I noticed the paper wedged between the door and the frame. This one felt heavier, almost damp from the mist. My hands shook as I unfolded it. I tried to forget, but I can't. Not after that night. Not after seeing the dog save you. Not after knowing you were worth saving. I don't expect forgiveness. Just understand, you weren't the one I meant to hurt. Stay safe, and if you ever wonder why, just remember the name. Harris Creek. Harris Creek. The name meant nothing to me. Not until I spent an evening scouring old maps and town records at the tiny library. It was an old logging site, abandoned long ago. Its only claim to fame was an accident that claimed 3 lives nearly 50 years ago. The newspaper clippings spoke of a man named Miller Harris, the owner of the site, and the tragedy that ruined his family. What I didn't understand was why the person who tried to kill me would point to that name, or why they felt the need to say I was worth saving. What connected me to Harris Creek? What twisted thread of fate had placed Buck and me on that path that night? I didn't have an answer then, but I felt deep down that the threads weren't random. The world doesn't often work in coincidences, not when a dog chooses a person or when a person finds belonging in the silence of a mist-clung town. I promised myself that one day I would walk to Harris Creek, not to find the person who tried to kill me, but to understand why. Not because I felt vengeance or fear, but because some stories don't end where you expect. Sometimes they wind deeper into the forest until, one day, you walk far enough to find a clearing, to find a grave, a ruin, or maybe just a whisper of truth. Through it all, Buck remained by my side. He didn't ask questions. He didn't expect answers. He just was, breathing, living, loving. And that was enough. As summer waned and the leaves began to whisper amber and gold, I felt a shift, not just in the world around me, but within myself. The night that Buck saved my life had changed the trajectory of my story, not because it had been a moment of terror, but because it became a moment of belonging. I had come to Maple Creek a broken person, but Buck had pulled me from the edge, pressed his nose to my hand, and refused to let go. And for that, for him, I would walk every path necessary to find the rest of the story. Autumn came quickly that year, brushing Maple Creek with a crisp amber glow. The mist rose earlier each morning, and the leaves shimmered crimson and gold as Buck and I wandered the old trail. The thought of Harris Creek refused to leave my mind. The name had settled deep in the marrow of my thoughts, like an itch I couldn't scratch. One Saturday morning I finally gave in. Buck watched patiently as I pulled a worn backpack from the closet and began filling it with essentials: a thermos of coffee, a water bottle, a flashlight, and a map I'd photocopied from the library. The map was old and brittle, the area marked as Harris Creek, little more than a smudge in a corner of the page. "Looks like we've got ourselves a walk, buddy," I said, fastening Buck's harness. He wagged his tail and tilted his head as if he already knew where we were going. The trail to Harris Creek was faint, a relic of the logging era long forgotten. The path twisted through dense woods and tangled undergrowth, where moss-clung trees pressed inward like silent witnesses. Buck trotted ahead, nose low, tail brushing the ferns. Occasionally he glanced back, checking to make sure I was still there. For the first few hours the woods offered only silence, the soft whisper of leaves and the sound of Buck's paws brushing the earth. It felt like walking into a forgotten chapter of the world, a place the present had decided to ignore. Around mid-afternoon, we came to a clearing. The ruins of an old building rose like a broken spine from the forest floor. The walls were half collapsed, and moss spilled from every crack. An old sign, half rotted and nearly illegible, still bore faint traces of lettering: Harris Creek Lumber Company. I felt Buck press closer to my leg as I stepped inside. The air was damp and smelled of earth and rust. The floor was littered with old tools and scraps of wood, long surrendered to decay. Against the far wall, a door, surprisingly intact, remained closed. With a deep breath, I pulled it open. Inside was a smaller room, a tiny office that had been sealed from the elements. The air felt charged somehow, like a space that refused to forget. An old desk sat in the corner, a stack of papers resting upon it, covered in a fine layer of dust. Buck gave a soft whine and pressed closer. I brushed the dust from the top page and read, October 16, 1973. The accident claimed 3 men today, my brother David. 2 workers, Marco and Will. The equipment failed. The bank gave out. The guilt rests with me. This place rests with me. What am I worth if those I was meant to protect have been lost? Miller Harris. My hand shook as I read the words. Whatever tragedy happened here had left its mark long ago, and it was a mark that refused to fade. Yet it didn't answer the question burning in the back of my mind: why was this place connected to the man who tried to kill me? Then I noticed a second piece of paper, folded and wedged between the desk and the wall. The handwriting was different, sharp, urgent. My heart pounded as I read. I came back because it was the only place that felt like penance. The accident claimed 3 lives. My silence claimed a 4th. You weren't the one I meant for that night. You weren't supposed to walk that trail. Not after dark. Not when I was looking for the man responsible for burying the truth. I am sorry. You deserve to walk free, to live, to remember that life can be saved as well as lost. R. R. The letter felt like a ghost brushing across the room. Suddenly it clicked. The man wasn't a murderer at heart. He was seeking some twisted version of vengeance or absolution for a tragedy long buried. Somehow, in that mist-clung woods, Buck and I had crossed paths with a man grappling with guilt deeper than any ravine. I sank to the floor, brushing Buck's fur as the weight of the discovery settled. The threads weren't random. The accident, the ruins, the man in the woods. Somehow, by sheer chance or some unseen force, we had walked into the heart of that story. But it didn't matter anymore. Whatever guilt he bore, whatever ghosts he chased, Buck and I had come out the other side. Not unscathed, but stronger for it. We had a bond rooted in trust, resilience, and a quiet understanding that life doesn't owe us reasons, only moments. As the sun sank beyond the trees, I stood and clipped Buck's leash. The ruins of Harris Creek felt like a chapter closed, a witness to a tragedy long ago and the echoes it had thrown across the years. We stepped out into the twilight, the forest swallowing the ruins until only the whisper of the wind remained. Walking the path back to Maple Creek felt different. The mist rose as it always had, and Buck pressed closer as the first stars winked to life. The threads that had pulled us here felt like threads that would now lead us home, to belonging, to remembrance, and to a quiet peace. That night, Buck and I settled on the porch. The mist rolled down from the hills, and Buck rested his head in my lap. I pulled out the notebook that had been gathering dust on my desk for too long. I started to write. Not the story I thought I would tell when I came to Maple Creek, but the one that found its way to me. A story about belonging, about scars and silence, about a dog that refused to walk away when the world felt too heavy to bear. Through Buck, through a mist-clung trail and a long-abandoned ruins, I learned that some moments don't just save your life. They save your heart, too. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The mist of Maple Creek became a kind of comfort, a witness to every morning walk with Buck, and every night spent with the sound of crickets filling the silence. The discovery at Harris Creek felt like a chapter closed, yet it also felt like a chapter opened. An understanding had taken root deep within me, reshaping how I viewed the moments that defined a life. The man with the rifle, the man called R, was never found, at least not by the sheriff or by any official record. But every so often, when the mist rose thick and the stars winked faintly through the trees, I wondered about him. I wondered if he had found some measure of peace in knowing that I lived, that the wrong person hadn't paid for the sins of the right one. Perhaps, somewhere in those woods, he had laid down the rifle for good and chosen to walk away from a lifetime of guilt. As for Buck and me, life settled into its quiet, sacred routine. The days felt slower, the nights warmer. The sound of Buck's breathing beside the bed became a reminder that belonging doesn't always come from places or people or things. Sometimes belonging arrives with 4 legs and a nose that nudges your hand when the world feels too heavy. I finished the book I'd started before all of this happened, but it wasn't the same book anymore. It became a memoir of moments. Moments when the mist spoke to the trees. Moments when a dog refused to leave a trail. Moments when a man with a rifle chose mercy. Moments when a heart found its belonging in a forgotten town. The book didn't land on the bestseller lists. It didn't make a huge splash. But it found its way to people. To readers who, in quiet letters and emails, said things like, "Your story felt like mine," or "Your words gave me a reason to walk another trail." The threads, once tangled and frayed, had woven themselves into a new pattern. Through it all, Buck remained my witness, my shadow, my reminder that life can shift with a single breath, that belonging can rise from places we least expect, and that one night, one dog, and one moment can save a life, not just from death, but from despair.